All right. Hey, good morning, guys. How you doing today? Good to see you. Welcome. My name is Andrew. Welcome to Thrive LA. It's good to have you guys here today. I'm super excited to continue our Friends That Benefit series. As Katie mentioned, we are on a journey to be the friend we always wanted, and God has invited us to be a church is in God's design, in God's plan, is an extended family where we welcome people in and love people well. And we don't want to just be a place where people show up and hear a message and go their own way, but we want to build meaningful relationships. And so today we're talking about welcoming, but I thought, since we're going to be talking about this reckless sort of welcoming and inclusion and inviting people in, I thought we should know, how do we know if we have overstayed our welcome with a friend? Maybe you've done this. I have been that person who didn't know when to go home. It was closing time, and they had to tell me, you don't have to go home, but get out of here. I've been that guy. Katie and I were at a party yesterday, and we looked around, and everybody else had left except for us, and our kid just running around screaming, and we thought maybe we should go. And so I wanted to be a good friend to you and give you some warning. Now, at this church, we're going to love you even when you overstay your welcome, but just so you know, in your friendships in the world, at work, so you don't burn any bridges, here's how you can know you overstayed your welcome. And the first one is this: if the people you're hanging out with or staying with ask you to go grocery shopping. If they say, go get your own groceries, if they're putting signs on things in the fridge, like this one that says, do not use, I spit in this, and someone keeps using it, if people are communicating that to you, you have overstayed your welcome. The second thing is also similar to that, and that's when they stop laughing at your jokes. If you were really funny when you first got to the party, or when you first spent the night the first time, and now they don't laugh at your jokes, you may have overstayed your welcome. The third thing is if they start dropping hints about the cost of flights home. So if they start mentioning that Southwest has a deal for Good Friday or Black Friday or whatever, you know you may have stayed too long at your buddy's place, that you should stop crashing there. And then finally, and most importantly, if the Netflix recommendations on your friend's account only start showing the shows that you watch, you need to go get your own place. You have overstayed your welcome. In the world, we have all experienced feeling like somebody wants us to leave. Am I right? We've all been in a situation where we were in a conversation and we felt like this person is trying to step away from me, they're trying to get out of this, they're trying to move on from this conversation. We've all been in a friendship or a relationship where we felt like we were investing, we were putting effort in, and yet we felt like we weren't getting much in return. And we've all experienced what it's like to show up at an event or a party or some sort of other group setting, and everybody seems to know somebody, and it's like I'm the only one who doesn't fit here. I remember I did not grow up going to church, as I've shared with you guys many times, but I remember when somebody invited me to church early on in my life, and it was a youth event at a church, and so they thought, you know how we're going to get kids to come? We're going to throw this really awesome party, and there's going to be video games, and there's going to be basketball, and there's going to be all this stuff going on. And so if somebody invited me and said, hey, I think you're going to like it, come with me. Well, I got there, I didn't know anybody, and it was worse than it being a church service. Because if it could have been a church service, I could have at least sat in a seat and felt alone all by myself with no one watching. But instead, it was a big party, and so everybody was having all this fun. And so I was hovering, watching the people play video games, going, I wish I could play. And then I saw people playing basketball, and I was thinking, I wonder if I'm allowed to play basketball. And nobody ever invited me in, and I went and I sat outside on a ledge by myself and was like, this sucks, when am I getting picked up? I couldn't get an Uber. This was before that. I had no cell phone. I was trapped, feeling like everyone here has a friend except for me. And I know that's a story about when I was young, but we feel that in adulthood, right? Only now what we do is we just pull out our phone and we're like, I'm checking my mail. And I know I don't have any new mail. I know I don't have any new texts, but I'm going to check it because I gotta feel like I'm okay here, like I have something to do. Well, my life was changed because as I was sitting there on the ledge, someone came up to me, noticed that I wasn't a part of the crowd, and said, hey, I really wish I had somebody to play catch with me. Would you mind? As if I was doing them a favor, and welcomed me into a friendship. And after 10 minutes of throwing the ball and getting to know me and asking my story and caring about my life, said, "You remind me of so-and-so. Can I go introduce you?" Brought me over to the video games and said, "Hey, I think it's this guy's turn," and told everyone my name. And connected me into community, into relationships, made me feel a part, like I belonged. And each one of us, and I don't care how cool you are, how many friends you have, what kind of background you came from, I know for a fact, everyone in this room wants to feel accepted and included. I know that. I know that's true. You could try to convince me that you're good on your own, you like life on your own. You can convince me that you're just marching to your own beat. And you may be a more introverted or extroverted version of that. You may not want to be around people all the time. People are a lot. That's okay. But you can't tell me that you don't want to be valued and seen. That you want people to pretend like you don't exist. We all want to feel like we matter. And that's true not just of the people in this room, but of the people in our neighborhoods, at our jobs, in our schools, at our work, in our building, in our family. It's true of your kid and your spouse and your parents and your siblings and your cousins. We all want to be seen and known. And so this series, we're exploring the idea that the church is God's vehicle for meaningful relationships. A meaningful relationship with God Himself, but that we experience in a community with other people. In Ephesians, we just went through the book of Ephesians before we started this series, and in Ephesians 2:19, it says that you are now members of God's household. And that word household is the Greek word oikos, and it refers to an extended family. So not just your blood family, but it refers to the people that you do life with. The 8 to 15, maybe 20 people that you interact with on a regular basis. It's the people you work with and play with and argue with. It's the people you like and don't like, the people who you influence and the people who influence you. It's the people in your immediate family and in your church and in your whole life. And some of them you may consider friends, and some of them may be frenemies, and some of them you just may not like very much at all, but those are the people you do life with. And so the church is meant to be a people that we're able to do life with. But also, God's plan to bring meaning and friendship and love into the world is not some big program or offering that a business might offer. It's not something you can sign up for, just a list. But God's plan for that is that the people of God, the family of God, would go love their extended family. And so you have a social network. You have a series of relationships in your life, and God has invited you to be Jesus to those people. In Mark 5, Jesus, after helping a man through his suffering and healing him, says, go to your friends, go home to your friends, to your oikos, that same word, to your extended family. Go to your extended family and tell them about what God has done for you, about His mercy. That the vehicle for change in the world, for friendship in the world, is that the people of God would go be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. And so we are taking ownership over these next 10 weeks, all of that to say, to be a friend to the people in our lives, to be the kind of friend to them that Jesus would be to them. And if you brought your social network list from last week, then I would encourage you to get that out and keep that in mind. If you haven't, feel free, ignore the next 5 minutes of what I'm going to say and identify some friends. Because nothing I'm going to say is going to matter if it doesn't change the way you treat another person. And so there has to be real people that we've identified to say, God has put them in my life. It is my responsibility to love them. And so I want to encourage you to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can pause. You don't have to ignore the next 5 minutes, although that is an option as well. Write down a few names, keep them in mind. As Katie mentioned earlier, pray for them regularly. And here's the idea of today. So we talked last week about pursuit, that we specifically identify these friends, that we would initiate deeper connections, and that we pray for them daily. Today, we're going to talk about the idea of welcoming, of hospitality. Romans 15:7 says, to welcome others as God in Christ has welcomed you. Welcome others as God has welcomed you. For the glory of God, we do this. So we welcome others, and that's the whole idea of today. I'm going to give us a brief definition. And basically, when I talk about welcoming, I'm talking about this idea of hospitality. I'm talking about making space for others to feel welcome, and for outsiders to feel like insiders. So you're making space for somebody who maybe doesn't feel like they belong, maybe doesn't feel like they're included, maybe feels like I'm different, I don't fit, I don't measure up, am I wanted here? You're making space for that person to feel like an honored guest. For a stranger to feel like a sibling, for an acquaintance to feel like a friend, for an enemy to feel like an ally. You are inviting them in and saying, you are wanted here. There is a space reserved for you. And so I want to begin to talk, before we get into all of the what and the how, I want to spend a few minutes talking about why. And I'm going to overwhelm you with the amount of reasons why. And you don't need to remember them all. I just want you to feel overwhelmed by how important this is. So you're going to hear 7 points on why we need to show hospitality. And I don't care that you remember all these. I just care that you're like, there was a lot of reasons why, okay? So just know now, like if you're like, I check in and out, I get bored, that's okay. Just remember, there's a lot of reasons. Here's the first reason, and we've already kind of talked about this. You need hospitality. Every single one of us, we've already said this, every single one of us has at times needed to feel welcomed, involved, and included. We've all had times in our life where we were the outsider. In the book of Exodus, chapter 22, verse 21, Moses is writing, but God is speaking to the people of Israel, the family of God. And they have come out of slavery in Egypt, and they're wandering in the desert. And then he says to them, you need to welcome the sojourner, the wanderer, in your midst, in your camp, because you were sojourners and wanderers. He goes, literally, you have been refugees, slaves, downcast, oppressed. Now you're wandering and homeless, out in the desert. You have no place to lay your head. He goes, you have experienced what it's like to be on the outside, to be without. And knowing what that feels like, keep an eye out for others. Be the friend you've always wanted. Rather than having a mentality of take, where we're each looking out for ourselves, we go, how can I make the people around me feel welcome and included? And so the first reason is that you need hospitality. I think about when Katie and I were first getting married, and we were very young and very poor by our sort of Western standards. And Katie was from Washington, and she was moving to the area, and we didn't have a place for her, and I was sleeping on somebody's couch. I was sleeping on my parents' couch, but I say somebody's, it sounds better. And I was sleeping on my parents' couch, and there was no more room on the couch, and Katie needed a place to stay while we planned our wedding. And she ended up staying with some close friends of ours. I'm actually officiating a wedding later today. She ended up going to live with those friends for a couple months, and they like fed her, and I don't think they clothed her, but they just took care of her in every way. But you know what's even crazier than that? Because that one you might make, like, that was really kind of them. I'm not saying I'm not appreciative of that, but they were like, he was like my best friend. He was my best man at my wedding. I'm officiating his wedding. We were tight. So you think, oh, maybe these people, like, they look out for their own. But you know what's crazy? There was a couple in our church who had never met Katie ever before. And they heard through the grapevine that we were facing this issue. and they called us up. They took us to In-N-Out. They bought us In-N-Out, which that's like the greatest thing you could ever do for someone. And they bought us In-N-Out, and they sat us down, and they said, we would like to offer you a place in our home free of rent for the next 3 months while you plan the wedding. And these are just a couple of like things we would ask you to consider us as you're doing that. And I was like, are you sure? Like, are you crazy? Like you don't even know her. Like, she may like start like punching your cats and like stealing your laundry, like jeans. You know, you could really sell Levi's for a lot of money. Like, you have no idea what she's gonna do to you, like in your house, but you're just welcoming her in. She made her feel like part of the family. And as she was moving to a new area, a new place, didn't know anyone, people took the step to say, hey, I want you to feel like you're part of the family. And we've been there, we've experienced that, and I hope that that motivates us to have the same mentality for others. Okay, I'm not gonna spend this long on all the points, I promise. This one's really important though. We all need hospitality. The second one is that God offers hospitality. So I mentioned Romans 15:7. We welcome people how? In the way Jesus welcomed us, right? We talked last week about how Jesus came from heaven to earth, met us where we were at, pursued us, initiated, came after us, picked us, wanted us. Well, in the same way, Jesus says, come as you are. You're accepted. You're loved. You can sit at my table. Jesus is the greatest welcomer. We could go on and on, tell stories about how God invites us into his family. That's one of the core purposes of the Church of God. So God offers it. And I'm going to tag onto that. And because God offers it, therefore, people deserve it. So God loves your neighbor. Sometimes I say people deserve hospitality, and some of you are saying, not the people around me, they don't deserve it. Because I've seen them, I've seen the way they act, they're really annoying, I don't like them. They come in, they mess up my stuff, they're in the way, they don't leave when it's time to leave. Katie and I, we've hosted small groups in our home for years, and people just don't care. They will just stay until whatever time you tell them it's time to go. Like, they have no regard. And so sometimes you think, not everyone, some of you have been into our homes for small groups, we love you. But sometimes we feel like people don't deserve it. And we feel like, how could we welcome them in after the things that they've done to me? We live in a culture of stranger danger, where if you haven't totally proven to me your reliability and your trustworthiness, and they're not going to be a burden, I'm going to keep you at arm's length. But God actually says, no. In Matthew 25:40, the King will say to us one day, what you have done to the least of these, you have done unto me. God says, I'm going to measure how much you love me by how well you measure the most unlovable people in your life. I'm going to say that again. God says, I will measure how much you love me by how much you love the most unlovable people in your life. What you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. And God says that people are made in my image. They have value, they have worth, they have dignity. And so although there may be at times wisdom and appropriate boundaries and carefulness and maybe not a foolishness, you know what though? At the end, like, if we want to err on a reckless sort of inclusion. Because these people are divinely touched and formed by God and have value and worth. And so even the people in our life that are difficult to love, we love. Jesus says anybody can love their friends. I tell you to love your enemies. And so all people deserve hospitality and love. Also, I want to say God requires it. And I want to talk for a minute about the requirement for leadership in the church. In Titus 1:8 and also in 1 Timothy 5, we see the qualifications for both male and female leaders in the church. It doesn't matter your age, your gender, your background, who you are. If you're to be a leader in the church, you must be, the scripture says, hospitable. God never imagined in 1,000 years that anybody could be a leader in his church who is not welcoming and inclusive and hospitable to others, even strangers. It is so much a core part of the DNA and the ethos of Christianity And so for many of you who are taking on roles of leadership in the church, I want you to hear this. This is a non-negotiable. Hospitality is a non-negotiable of leadership in this church. It is a command for all Christians, for all people in all places, that God says you will be welcoming of others. But here it will be what we eat and drink and live and breathe and die for. It is the thing we will not apologize for. We will be hospitable. And if you're not interested in that, I don't want to say go find another church, but that's who we're going to be. Not perfectly. We believe in a God of forgiveness and of grace. We're going to talk later about how we do it with His power and His help. But it's got to be what we're striving for. We should be the friendliest, warmest, most inclusive environment in this entire city. And I gotta say to the church, to you, but to the church at large, we suck. This is something God is calling us to. We have to do better. God is saying this is what it means to be a church in so many ways. And we can't miss it. God requires it. God rewards it, though, in several ways. In the form of mutually beneficial relationships. There's a story in Acts 27 where the Apostle Paul is welcomed in on an island, and the people are really good to him, and they give him a place to stay. And while Paul is there, he notices that people are sick, and Paul starts praying for people and healing people. And I don't think those people offered Paul a place to stay so that they could fix all their problems. But what happens is when you're kind to others, you end up, so many times receiving their kindness in return. You receive their kindness in return. We don't give to get, but it's amazing how when we are welcoming to others, how much that comes back around to us. Not only that, but we find reward in heaven. In Luke 12 verses 12 to 14, Jesus talks about throwing a banquet. And he says, don't invite all the people who can invite you back. They can throw their own banquets. He says, but when you throw a banquet, invite the poor and the needy, the lame, the blind, the sick, the people who are not invited to anybody else's party. Invite them in, and guess what? The reward you will get, the invite back you will get, is your Father in heaven someday saying, well done, good and faithful servant. Your Father in heaven will reward you for inviting His children to the party. Furthermore, in Matthew 10, we find out that actually God double rewards you in heaven. Because when you get to heaven and it's time for Him to lavish His kingdom and the riches of heaven on you, to invite you in as a prince or a princess in His royal family, when you get to that time, that eternal place where there's no suffering or pain, and that wonderful time with God forever and ever, when you get there, not only will you be rewarded for showing hospitality, but the scripture teaches us in, what did I say, Matthew 10, verses 40 to 42, that if you are welcoming to a prophet, you will get the prophet's reward. And if you are welcoming and hospitable to a righteous person, you will get the righteous person's reward. And so God promises that if you are welcoming to others, you will not only get rewarded for your faithfulness, but He says, I will reward you with all, I'm going to double it up. I'm going to do a matching deal where all the thing that I would give into that person that you're being hospitable to, I'm going to throw that on you too. I'm going to multiply it because I'm so stoked that you would treat one of my kids this way. And so God says, not only am I going to reward you for your good deeds, but I'm going to give you an extra measure. I'm going to match their rewards and give them to you as well when you're hospitable. Which, I don't know about you, but now it's kind of sounding like I'd be kind of foolish not to be hospitable. Like I'm leaving a lot of good stuff on the table. God rewards hospitality. I'm going to move to the next one. Your hospitality can change the world. There's a crazy story. I love this story. In 2 Kings chapter 6, I came across this in my study. I wasn't, maybe I was aware of it in the past. I didn't remember it. And I came across this study and I was blown away by this text. The people of God are at war with some enemies, and they capture this group of enemy soldiers and other people. And they say this prayer, and they're like, God, we captured them. Should we slaughter them? Which is a weird prayer, but a lot of religious people pray prayers like that. And God's like, well, you actually already captured them. Maybe you should serve them a meal. See, God has always been a God of peace and of reconciliation. Some people think the Old Testament was this angry God. No, God has always been a God of forgiveness and mercy. God says, why don't you offer them a meal? And so they do. And it says, and the two countries experienced peace. When they invited their enemy to the table instead of punishing them, their countries achieved. It's a story of peace in the Middle East. That's like the most impossible thing in the world. That's the story that's recorded in the Bible. That when you're hospitable to an enemy, you make peace. And you can do that. And broken marriages can be restored. And wayward children can be brought back. And coworkers that you never go to their office and you never speak and you have to talk to other coworkers to get things done. Like you can become friends with that person. And bosses that frustrate you and employees that never listen. At the dinner table, there can be the seeds for peace. And you can change the world. Now, some of you are saying, I'm not so important. I can't change the world. And you're wrong, because if you start with the 10 people around you that you do life with, if you start with the people on your list, you will change the world. You will change each of their worlds and the worlds of everyone around them. So you very much can change the world. And it happens one person, one relationship at a time. But I want to go a step further, and this is the final reason. So you're exhausted at all the reasons to be hospitable. Do you feel convinced yet? Yeah, you don't seem as convinced. I'm going to give you one last reason. When you're hospitable, you can help somebody else change the world. So in 3 John, verses 5 to 8, John praises the people in the church who are hospitable to God's workers. And in Galatians 6, we're encouraged to be especially welcoming to those of the household, the oikos of faith. And the reason is because when you're trying to change the world, if I come and help you, then I get to multiply my impact because I get to help you have an impact. And this is the idea of like what a church and why there's leadership in a church. So the purpose of leadership in the church is to say, I'm going to come alongside and I'm going to help be a support and be hospitable to you, not so that you can receive it just alone, but so that you can have the strength and the support in the community of faith to now go make a bigger impact in your life. And so ministry inside the walls of the church is to help lift up others to go make an impact. And so we as a church, we want to partner with each other. We want to encourage each other. We want you to feel like the difference that you're making in your job, in your relationships, with your art, whatever it is, that we are here to support you in that. And when I say we, I don't mean me, not to exclude me, but I mean we. Like that we're here for each other to help that so that you're not on your own as you go to make a difference. And we want to care about the different parts and who are doing work in our community, who are serving the needs of others. And we don't want to just think inward, but we want to think outward and say, how can we help those who are at work meeting all of the needs of our society? Whether they're doing it as Christians or not, we want to say we are for this good and we're here to help. And so our hospitality can not only change the world directly, but it can do so indirectly when we support others in their work. So 7 reasons. Again, here's the big idea. Hospitality is important. Okay? It makes a difference in people's lives in the world we live in. By welcoming people, including people, making space for people, we can find a better world to live in. And God will reward you for that because God is a welcoming, hospitable God. So I want to return to what hospitality is. So I said hospitality is making space to welcome others, for outsiders to feel like insiders. And I want to continue to expand this. So now you're saying, I'm convinced. I'm going to be hospitable. I may not be very good at it, but I'm going to give it what I got, right? Okay, so what am I signing up for? Here we go. So a couple things. I mentioned that it's about making strangers feel like siblings. Leviticus 19:34 says this. So we talked about the sojourner, the exile, the refugee. And he says in Leviticus to the people of God, this is in the same chapter where the commandment to love your neighbor comes. Remember last week we taught about the story of the Good Samaritan? And we said, who is my neighbor? And it's like, the person who's good to their neighbor is their neighbor, right? And so we said we got to identify our neighbor. That was last week. You can go check it out on Facebook if you missed. Here we learn a little bit more about loving your neighbor. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns, who wanders with you, as the native among you. And you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. So he says, if there is a stranger among you, if there is a guest, an outsider, someone who doesn't fit, whether they're different from a different race or ethnicity, whether they believe a different religion, whether they're a different gender, whether they're a different age, whether you're saying, well, I'm married and they're single, or I have kids and they're old, or whatever. God says, what I have asked of you, what it means to love your neighbor, is to treat them as if they were a native part of your group, of your social circle. So treat them as if they fit with you just in the way that somebody who is just like you could fit. Think about this. We all love people who are like us. And we want to identify with people who are like us. And it's important for us to be a diverse church of different ages and backgrounds and everything, so that when anybody comes, they can identify with somebody like them. But it's our responsibility to allow people, to try to create a space for people to say, even if you're different, even if we come from different angles, we believe different things, we have different habits or cultures or mentalities, I want you to feel like there is a space for you and I have a seat at the table for you. You show up, you feel like I'm not on the in crowd, I don't fit in any of these spots. It's the mission of the church of God. It is the second greatest commandment, only before loving God and himself. And it is so uniquely tied to that commandment that we would treat outsiders as if they are just exactly part of the family native. Now this has implications on a global scale, which I will leave for you to figure out. Those are very important as well. And there are atrocities committed all around the world and in our own country that we need to take responsibility for and be an active voice in working towards peace. But it starts with the people I come into contact with on a regular basis. It starts with the social network that we have. And this is the idea of biblical hospitality. And so we create a welcoming space with no distinctions, where when people come in, they feel like, we're not different, we're the same. I'm equally valued. James chapter 2, verse 1. Man, these verses. My brothers, show no partiality. That means favoritism. Show no favoritism, as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. Verse 2. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in. And I know that's confusing, because now we wear shabby clothing to be cool. It's confusing. So you can reverse it if that's helpful. When you go to Masa and you're like, there's rips in their jeans, I don't understand. No, okay, whatever. So, but whatever your version of cool or hip or rich or status or wealth or inside is, if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing, and you say, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the poor man, you stand over there, or sit at my feet. Verse 4, have you not then made distinctions among yourself and become judges with evil thoughts? If ever in our gatherings as a church, people are made to feel less than, or different, or excluded, we have fundamentally misunderstood what it means to be a church. And we rally around Jesus and we believe in Jesus, and sometimes things we believe about Jesus can be divisive. But the people of God do not judge based on outward appearances and prejudices. They do not exclude, but rather, instead, we seek to make people feel like they are a part of it. And in doing so, we say, come as you are, and we offer a place of rest and refreshment. 2 Timothy 1:16, Paul is bragging on a time when somebody was hospitable. He's bragging on the other person for being hospitable. And he says, may the Lord grant mercy to the household, to the whole social network of Onesiphorus? One-Cyphorus? That's probably not it. Of Onesiphorus. How about if that was your name? There would be no distinctions. We would just treat you regular. May the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me, and remember, Paul was in prison, for he often refreshed me, and he was not ashamed of my chains. But when he arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly, and he came and found me. So part of hospitality is not only creating a space for people where they're able to just be who they are, but in such a way that it is refreshing and restorative, where physical needs are met, where social needs are met, where emotional needs are met, where spiritual needs are met, where we feel like this is a person who doesn't care, who doesn't mind, who doesn't hold it against me, the things that I've been through or the things that I've done, but rather their only goal is to lift up my heart and my soul, to honor me and to give me rest. Have you ever felt that rest? Where you're with someone, and Katie and I talk about this when we have people over, when we go to somebody's house. Sometimes when we go to people's houses, we feel like, and this is probably more about us than about them, but we feel like we got to be on our best behavior. Right? And we come in and we're respectful and all those great things. But then you have some friends where you're like going through the bills on the counter with them. And you're like, man, you didn't pay that? And it's like intimate, right? You don't have as many friends like that, right? That's a small circle. But sometimes there's this place where you can just fully be yourself, right? And you're in your yoga pants and no makeup, or your gym shorts, or whatever, and you're just you with them. And that takes time. But some people have a gift, and this is the idea of hospitality. It's the gift of helping people to believe that they're actually allowed to be themselves. It's the warmth and the frame of mind and the attitude that helps people to feel like, I could walk around in my socks, that's cool. I'm just going to be me. And there's so much power in that. There's so much power in that. Okay, we're going to keep moving. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do this with just some practical tips. We're going to move quickly as we kind of wrap things up. A big part of this is anticipating people's needs. Okay, we live in a city of networking, and all y'all are trying to hustle, right? And we network, and we're trying to find the next job, the next gig, and who wants to buy my art, and where can I get the next job, and who can help me on my career goals and my life goals. And it's not bad to need things. We all need things. But the idea of hospitality is not giving to get, it's giving to give. We read out of Luke earlier, right? Don't invite the people who can invite you back. I used to think that networking was about going and finding who could give me stuff. And I've realized, and this is just like a pro tip if you're trying to work on your career, you're going to do much better if you just try to serve people and you don't try to get anything back. And what'll happen is if you serve enough people, actually a lot of things are going to come back to you just because, right? Because people are going to actually like you. I've got a friend, and he's just always welcoming people into his home. He's always buying people lunch. He's always complimenting people, not because he's trying to flatter them, but because he just likes people. I don't know what's wrong with him. He just sees all this good in people, right? He sees them perhaps the way God sees them. And I got to tell you, man, he is living a good life. Because every time, like, I think, like, he had a kid, and I swear, like, he got 300 presents. People who weren't even invited are like, can I just please send your kid a present? He's just so loved. Because he's always being good to other people. Not to get something, but in a genuine way. And people feed off that, and they want to give. But we don't give in order to get. We just give to give. That's the only way it can work. And so we anticipate what do people need. And there's small, like, practical things in terms of thinking when they come into your home. Like, well, maybe they want a glass of water. Or maybe they'd like to come to my place. Maybe we were going to meet up for coffee and I can drive closer to them. And I know, like, ooh, gas is tight, but, well, gas is probably tight for them too. And so maybe I can go closer to them. Or there's a million different ways we can meet practical needs. But we have to be anticipating and thinking about others. The second thing is, in order to do that, we have to plan for spontaneous hospitality. People don't need us when it's convenient. You ever notice that? I notice that people need me at the time when I'm least able to be needed. I'm sitting and I have a nice day off and everything's like good in the world. Some stuff goes wrong during that time too. You ever notice how you're like, man, I've got such a busy day, nothing can go wrong, and then your phone starts going off? And you're like, of course they're calling me right now. People never need it's never convenient to help others. The reason we need to make space is because our own needs will fill all the space available. Our own needs, our own relationships, our own priorities will always fill all the space available. And so we need to we need to be intentional about creating space. We need to plan in advance to be the kind of people who make space for others in our lives, at our dinner table, in our friendships, in our schedules. There's an old story about at a seminary, they did like a test on this group of seminary Bible college students. And they put a beggar on the side of the street, and half the people walking by were heading to a final that they had to go pass to graduate Bible college, and half the people were just, I don't know, they were getting ready to go have lunch or something. And what they noticed is it was just crazy. The people who were all going to this test, this final, all ignored the person who was begging, and all the people who were just wandering with no schedule stopped to help the person. And the reason is because we kind of want to help people, we kind of want to love people, but only at a certain cost. Only at a certain level of convenience or sacrifice. And so, to be hospitable, we need to plan and make space. And many of you, I want to encourage you, many of you do this so well. That you're planning ahead and you're thinking ahead, how can I be there for others and how can I sacrifice? Now to do this is the third point, we need to rely on a team. In Genesis, there's a story of Abraham being welcoming to some guests. And he runs into the house, and his whole household, his whole oikos, his whole social network is there. And they all band together to welcome the guests. And that's what it takes. We can't do it on our own. I can't, here on a Sunday, right, there's like 15 seconds after the service ends. And there's maybe new people we want to connect with, and they're not sure if they want to stay, and they're nervous, am I going to make a friend? And I'm thinking in my head, like, okay, well, at least I can go walk up and talk to one of them, right? But for us to make an impact in our community, we all need to be saying, who can I talk to? Who's sitting next to me? How can I welcome them? It takes a village. And we're very thankful. Katie and I feel like we have a great support system. And so when we go out to dinner with somebody in the church and we say, hey, can we go grab some time with you? We have people here in the church who will say, hey, we'll watch Dax while you go do that. Or my sister or somebody else will come and say, hey, let me come and meet your needs as you go meet other needs. And we've hosted small groups in our home. And we said, okay, we're creating space for people to feel welcome. But then, okay, Hannah actually ends up bringing the food, because if we're going to clean and come home after a busy day or whatever, we can't do it all on our own. And so that's a helpful resource. And we would, maybe when they host, do that for them. But it takes us all doing it together. And you cannot be welcoming to people if you're not doing it as part of a community. I mean, you can, but you get burnt out, you get tired, you run out of space. So we do it as a team. We had some people stay with us recently, and somebody had to give us the air mattress. Which moves to the next point. We need to trust God's provision. We need to trust God's provision. You remember the story of Jesus feeding the 4,000 and feeding the 5,000? And they're like, We just got our Lunchables here. How are we going to feed all these thousands of people? Not enough to go around. And Jesus is like, I got this. Just go start handing it out. Trust me, I'll take care of it. And they walk, and the 12 disciples are all done, and they started with just a couple of loaves and fish, but each of the 12 disciples has their own basket, their own memorial. Like, oh shoot, look, God made it happen. There's a story in the Old Testament about some spies going into the land of Canaan to go check out this sort of reconnaissance trip God had sent them on. And there was this prostitute named Rahab who was hospitable to them. And I love that story because it shows that it's not our status in life, it's not the wealth or the amenities that you offer. That's the last point. Attitude is more important than amenities. Hospitality is not about the fine china and the big house. It's not about spending a lot of money on people. It's about the way you treat people. Welcoming somebody into your messy shack of a place means so much more than throwing a fancy party where people have to feel fake. Hospitality has nothing to do with money or social status. It has everything to do with people feeling the Spirit of God coming out of you towards them. It has to do with the way you see them and prepared for them and believed that they were worth having into your life. And it doesn't need to happen at your table in your house. It can happen in the community. It can happen as you go by during the day. It can happen when you smile at someone or make eye contact or remember their name. To say, I've made a space for you in my mind. I've made a space for you on my list. I want to know you. I care that you're here. Now, I want you to look at the names that you've written down, and I want you to ask, how can I make space for these people to feel valued and refreshed? But I also want you to consider, is there space on this list for somebody who's on nobody's list? Is there space in my social network for the person that nobody is including, that nobody is welcoming? Am I aware? Have I considered what the people around me, even the people sitting around me right now, what they may be going through life, what kind of relationships they need, how I can be there for them? God has invited you into his family. God loves you deeply. He welcomes you unconditionally. He says, come to Jesus Christ. Come to know me. And that is who we are and what we do as a church. And so I want to invite you into that mission, into that purpose, to make space for others, to help outsiders feel like insiders. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for welcoming us, for loving us. And God, this has been a lot today. It feels like a lot to me. But God, I pray that we would be a welcoming community, that we would be a hospitable community, that we would think of the needs of others, that we would love others well. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Hey, I want to invite my friend Maria up right now. We believe in, yep, that's all the way up. And we believe in people telling their stories, and we believe in empowering new leaders, and we believe each of you has a story, God's stories in your life. And so each week through our series, we're going to have somebody different share about a friendship that has been meaningful to them. And so I've asked Maria to come share with us this. If you don't know, say hi, Maria. And I've asked her to share a story about a friend and a situation where she felt really welcomed and the impact it made on her life. And so she's going to share, and then we'll continue in singing and communion and all that afterwards. So,
Hi. So back in 2012, that year was a really hard year for me. I had just graduated college and moved back in with my parents, and I had left my entire life that I had built while I was in college, all of my friends, everything. And I found that it was really hard to pick up where I had left off 4 years before because time doesn't stop. So everything, the church, all of my friends, they had all moved on and done normal things with their lives, and so I'm coming back and trying to fit myself back in, and it was just really, really difficult and wasn't working. I was very depressed. There was a lot of stuff I was working through in addition to that I was just kind of angry with God, but I knew in college I went to a Christian school, but I had stopped consistently going to church. I didn't have a church family, and so I knew coming back that all I had was God, and that a big step in me being able to move forward was to find a new church and to find a new family. So after about a year or so, I had finally found a church. I had tried different churches, and it was really hard to fit into, again, just things that were already established. A lot of the churches I had tried to go to, they all had a different vibe, but it was kind of cliquish, and some of them it wasn't very welcoming, and I had heard about a church that just launched a new campus, and I was like, oh, this is great. They haven't established all of these things yet. I can just work my way in. It'll be awesome. But I showed up, and it was a lot bigger than I thought. There were a lot more people, and everybody did kind of seem to know each other. And so I found myself kind of standing by the snack table, just trying to look busy, watching all these people just be friends and have fun. And when I had walked in, I saw this couple standing together, and they looked super cool. And we don't have cool people in my town. They don't exist. And I was like, wow, those people look so cool. It'd be so fun to be friends with them. I'm like, they will never talk to me, and I'm not brave enough to talk to them. So after 2 minutes, the husband walks over and he's like, hey, I'm Cameron, what's going on? And I'm like, what is going on? I'm so confused. And so then his wife comes over, he introduces me to his wife, and she's super great. They're just really energetic, friendly people. And they're like, we have a small group for young adults and college-age kids. You should come. It's going to be awesome. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm super shy and have social anxiety, but this is going to be great. So I show up to their house, and I'm super nervous, and they had a very small apartment, and there were a lot of people there. But they still, they made time to talk to me, and I was like, okay, cool, you weren't just trying to boost the numbers in your group, you care about me as a person. And every week that semester, I would find myself do I really want to go? I'm still not really clicking with other people in this group, but I know if I'm not there, Cameron and Kelsey are going to look for me, and they're going to text me and be like, hey, what's up? How's it going? And so the notice that they took of me was really important. It meant a lot to me to have somebody just even though you have a full life, you're still making a space for me. Through that small group, I wound up getting connected. I actually started making other friends, and I wound up getting into leadership and leading my own small groups and being that person for other women. And it was really, really exciting. And so that attitude of just warmth and hospitality and friendliness is something that's very important to me when I'm looking for a new church. And I'm really excited. I feel like I found that here. Everybody's been super great, and so I'm just excited to be a part of this family.
This song is called Amazing Grace. You've probably known about it. You thought it was a song just about God, and it is about God. But really everything that we just heard about hospitality